This is an RNZ podcast.
They say it takes a village to raise a child. I'm Lynn Freeman, and here we draw on my conversations with experts on 9 to Noon to help you navigate family life. What are the most common speech sound errors in young children? At what age should children be speaking clearly and pronouncing words correctly? Wellington speech and language therapist Christian Wright is with me in the Wellington studio with some tips for parents. Kia ora, good morning.
Good morning, Lynn. How are you?
I'm well, thank you very much. I was so aware as I was reading out that introduction of trying to speak really well. Is this what happens to you all the time?
Yeah, I do get this all the time.
Going to a dentist, are my teeth clean? Yes, sorry about that.
Oh, no, your speech is normal, Lynn.
Thank goodness. Right, well, let's have a look at these errors, if you like, that we're talking about. And I guess we should establish too, because I was thinking about this, people want benchmarks with their young people. You know, is my child at 2, 3, 4, 5 doing what they should be doing? But I know in my family, particularly the boys in the 2 generations down, have been very slow speakers, late speakers. So do people have to, what are we talking about here? We have to be careful that every child is unique?
Yes, to some extent that's right. There's always variability within norms. So there are always recommendations around when a child should say their first word or when certain speech sounds might be expected to come in, but there's always some variance within that.
I just didn't want people to panic.
Yeah, no, totally. Absolutely. I think a starting point, as you say, you're quite right, looking at the speech norms. So just recently, actually, in November last year, the American Journal of Speech Language Pathology, they released 2 Australian researchers that are quite well known have updated, in a sense, the speech norms. And it's really great. It's a very easy journal article to read, but even more, I'll send a link later on for parents if they want to go and read a really well-written article by a very parent-friendly writer about this. But essentially what they did is they looked across 27 languages, and they were looking at across these languages, and this includes things like German, Mandarin, Arabic, Danish, Slovenian, a very interesting language, Xhosa, which is an African language. So all these different languages, and they were looking for commonalities amongst the consonants and when these would come in. And what they found is that basically by 5 years old, in all these different studies that they'd done, 5-year-olds produced consonants 93% correct. So it's a very high success rate by the time you're 5. And when we take that and put that alongside our knowledge that 4-year-olds, by the time you're 4, you're usually 95% intelligible to strangers. And as I've said in previous sessions, that intelligibility is not about accuracy. It's about how easy you are to understand. You can make an error but still be easy to understand. But there are some errors that are so destructive that they subtract from intelligibility. So if by 5 you should have at least 93% or more of your consonants correct, and if by 4 you're 95% intelligible, it's just giving us the picture that by 5 you're clear and easy to understand. And I think that's a starting point for parents, because often all of us, well-meaning parents, think, I'll just give it a bit longer, when it's something that needs attention now, because the child isn't that intelligible, or not that you're going to add up all the consonants and work out the percentage, but there's enough there that you have concern. And so for parents who are listening, be reassured in the first instance that between 2 and 5, there are patterns of error in the speech of children. That is normal, and they are well researched and well recognised.
Could you give some examples?
So, for example, when they say cat, they say tat. So they replace the back sound, the k, with a t. Or a spider is a pider. Putting aside multisyllabic words, which every child has trouble with. There's lots of hostaples out there, and hippopotamuses and all those kinds of things. But the point being that there are patterns of error, but generally speaking, by the time a child is 4.5, the overwhelming majority of those patterns have gone, which is why their intelligibility is good and also their consonant accuracy has improved so much. So there are, however, which is what we're talking about today, a small pool of sounds that can be troublesome and can persist. And I've based this on my clinical experience, some of it on the research, but some on my clinical experience. If parents take a look at the link that I will post later, they'll see, it's quite neatly done, the different stages between 2 and 3, 4, and then going up to 5, all the way up to 6 years. You'll see the sounds that you should be expecting to see coming in as the child progresses through those first 5 years. But equally, there are some sounds that are, as I said, just troublesome. And the first one we're going to talk about is the back sounds, the Ks and Gs. So often when children come to see me and they're 5 years old, always when they walk in the door, you have a chat, you get them nice and comfortable, have a play, and there are basically 4 or 5 sounds that I'm immediately listening for because they are the most common. So this is one of them, the K sound. That's a sound that should have fixed itself by the time a child's 3.5. So it is persisting quite a long time here into the age of 5. So what they're often doing, as we talked about before, they're taking back sounds Ks and Gs and they're moving them to the front of their mouth and producing them as Ts and Ds. When we did a study of just over 1,000 New Zealand children some years back, I think it was 2005, what we found, we looked at the percentages, and we found that by the time they're 5, this issue affects about 5% of school-age children. So we'll go through some percentages as we go through today. So the Ks going, Gs going to Ts and Ds. That's the first one. What I'll do today is just quickly cover the 5 sounds, and then we'll go into the important bit, what you should do to fix it. The second one is consonant blends, so like S blends, like sp and sm, st, sn, those kinds of sounds. L blends, bl, cl, fl, and then R blends, so br, cr, tr. Those are also susceptible to not developing very well in those preschool years, so you can have a bunch of 5-year-olds who don't do so well on those. The long sounds, S and F, so there are other sounds, but these are the 2 I'm picking, which are quite common. They are often made to be short, so S's turn into T's or D's, F's turn into P's or B's.
Could you give me an example?
So a sock is a dock, a fish is a bish, so we see some of those. Sorry, I've just realised to go back to those blends, often they'll delete part of the blend. So a spider is a pider, that will persist. Sometimes in the L blends they'll replace the L with a W, so a plane is a pwain, or sometimes they just delete the L, it's a pain. But what you're listening for is you're hearing an error, and as a parent, what I encourage parents to do, just write down the word. So what was the word they were trying to say and how did they say it? What changed? Why is it quirky? And then try and look specifically at what it is. And then you can go to a chart, like I will provide the link later, to work out, well, when should that have come in and should I be concerned? Then moving on, we've got our L's and R's. These are tongue tip movement sounds. So the idea is your tongue tip is lifting up to either the gum ridge for the L or roughly halfway back in your mouth for R. And often children simplify this to a lip or a jaw movement. So why that is, it's a fine gross motor distinction. So gross motor being big movement. Your jaw and your lips are bigger, easier movements than focusing on your tongue, which is a muscle with a fine motor ability. So they'll often oversimplify. So a ladder is a wadder or a yadder, and a rabbit is a wabbit, sometimes a yabbit. I've seen those as well. And then lastly the TH, that's our 5th sound. Now this one is just so common in 5-year-olds. In fact, you can expect roughly 70% of new entrants to not make a TH at the beginning of a word. It'll usually be an F, sometimes a V, just depending on the kind of word it is, but we see this all the time. It often resolves itself within the first 2 years. So it's just important for parents to know this is very common, and the TH error, and there are certainly so many instances I've seen of wonderful teachers who do such a good job of fixing THs because they fix it as part of the reading. Because TH is one of the highest frequency sounds in reading because of this, that, the, those kinds of words. So easy for teachers to fix because you can visualize it really easily too. Your tongue's just between your teeth so you can measure it and see it. So those are the 5. Your back sounds, your cluster sounds, the long sounds, S and F, your L and R sounds, and then your TH sound. So those are the 5 groups we're talking about. So the most important bit is how do you fix it? And I think it's good to have a framework to approach it. So the framework that, I've actually just pulled one together for today for parents just to keep it simple. This isn't necessarily the only framework, But the acronym is DIVA, which is easy to remember, D-I-V-A. So the first step is the D, and that's to discriminate, because it's important that some of our children who have trouble with their speech don't realise they're making the error. So you can put 2 words in front of them that rhyme but differ by only the error. So what I mean is you've got car and tar, or key and tea. And if you say to the child, point to the one that I say, and you say tea, and they point to the cup of tea, and then you say key, and then they aren't sure which one you're saying, this is not uncommon. It's a significant difficulty, and it means that it's unlikely that the sound's going to correct itself anytime soon, because the child doesn't perceive the change. Certainly there are, as a percentage, a smaller group of children would have that trouble. Most children can hear the sound change, but they can't organise it to make the sound correctly. So it's a motor-based issue, meaning they're having trouble coordinating it. The children who can't perceive it, that's much more complicated, because it resides more in the linguistic aspect of it. They don't hear and distinguish the difference in the first instance. So they're not making a meaning differentiation, which is actually really problematic. And those are also the kids that when you say to them, I can't find my T's, they don't look at all confused by that. They just, they're quite accepting of it. They're also the children that when you repeat back how they've said it, and they have said it incorrectly, they don't try to correct you. So the children who they can distinguish it, and it is just solely a motor-based issue, will usually pull you up on it. Not T's, T's is what they'll say. They can't fix it, but they know that it's wrong. So that discrimination is really critical, and really, because if you haven't worked out if the child's discriminating yet, your efforts can be undermined because they aren't perceiving it. So you can spend ages trying to fix something. So that's the first thing we're trying to look at. The I in DIVA is isolate, and what you're trying to do there is teach them to isolate the sound. And what I mean by that is for them to articulate the sound just as an individual sound unit, so that you're basically helping them to organise the motor plan to make the sound. And that can take some time in itself. And then the V is to visualize, and what I mean by that is I will always look to introduce a picture or a gesture to associate with the sound, because I want to externalize for the child the correction to something that they can see and not just have to hear. And the reason for that is, in behavior change, we want our children, no matter what behavior we're trying to change, to own that behaviour change as early as possible without being dependent on adults prompting them verbally to change. We want them to be engaging in problem solving and taking responsibility to think through, what do I need to do different to line my behaviour up with what you want?
Because that's the instinct, isn't it, of parents, of adults, is just simply to correct, and just keep correcting. So you're talking about something much more thorough, like study the behaviour, maybe write it down and really think it through. Yeah,
that's right. You want them to see that. And as 5-year-olds, they are capable of that. They're much older now. And so, for example, if I'm working on a sound like an F sound, often we associate that with the strange, this is going to sound really weird to people, but it seems to work, associate it with a bunny, a picture of a bunny's face. So just a cartoon bunny with big teeth, because the F is your teeth on your lips. So we talk about it being the bunny sound, and you need to look like a bunny, put your teeth on your lip. So you coach them through that, but as you move into treating the sound, you've just got the picture there, that when they make the error, I will wait and see if they look at the picture and correct it for themselves, because I want them as early on as possible to begin to think and own that change for themselves, instead of just being verbally prompt dependent. And then eventually, of course, you would fade the picture and you would just wait and see if they can remember, that's right, when he waits, it's because I need to change something about my speech. And we're talking about working at just the individual word level at this point. So I would wait and they would say, but, and I would sit there and look at them, and if they got really stuck, I would tap the picture and they would remember the bunny sound and say f-ut and try and make the F. And if they got really stuck and weren't doing it, then I would step back in with my verbal prompting and try and show it to them again. But you're always trying to work along that continuum to help children to own the change. So that's the visualising aspect. And then last, it was a bit of a stretch, and I just did it for the means of an acronym. A is ameliorate, which isn't a particularly common word, but anyway, it works for Diva. So the idea is the amelioration or the treatment aspect. When a child is good at discriminating and isolating and visualising, then you can be confident of tackling and establishing a sound in the child's speech sound system. So let's jump into the specifics of a sound. Let's look at, say, for example, the K's and the G's. So again, going back to what we said earlier, we would show them a picture of a key versus a T, making sure that they can hear it. So you say to them, I'm going to say one of these words. I want you to listen and point to the one I say. You're trying to make sure that they do discriminate. If they don't, you need to spend more time there and be modelling that word and getting them to listen. Can you hear the difference? One of them's a k at my back of my mouth, and one of them's t. It's at the front of my mouth. So you're trying to point all of that out and raise their awareness. And then we get into so that's the first step. They've become aware, or they're demonstrating they already are. And then you're teaching them to isolate the sound. So how we're doing that? We're going to describe that it's a back sound. We're going to ask them to see if they can move their tongue to the back of their mouth. And often I'll get kids to open their mouth about halfway so that I can see what's happening. But also remembering they want to make a T sound, which is your tongue tip going up. And we want to get their tongue further back in their mouth to make a K sound. So if your mouth is open, it's further for your tongue to have to reach for T than it is for the back of it to go up. And then I try to elicit it. Sometimes I just get lucky. I open my mouth like they are, and I go, and I just stretch it a little bit. And you get lucky and they do it. And that's awesome. And then you can move on. But for many of our 5-year-olds, the reason that they haven't acquired the sound is they can't do it yet. So usually you get them going, t, and they do their T sound. So now we need to start using other strategies to elicit it. So the one that I usually use is the hoik, which is a bit heinous to start with. But anyway, you're trying to get them to be like a pirate. That sort of back, sort of almost guttural kind of sound at the back of the mouth. And a lot of children can make that sound. So if they've got their mouth open and they are trying to clear their throat and do a hoik, that's the genesis of contact of the back part of the tongue with the back part of the mouth. And then we begin to shape the behaviour from that. So we go from a dragged to a shorter to a and then you're shaping it into the sound.
And they feel like they're making progress too, which
they
is
do
great.
usually, absolutely. Yeah. And look, also as a word of warning, I mean, I want parents, you'll obviously give this a go if this is relevant, but it's boring as heck most of the time for kids, so just be aware that you feel excited. They're not as excited as you about this. They have been perfectly happy up to this point, many of them, so you will need to structure this time in a way to keep it entertaining. And often what I'll do is show them how many attempts I expect. So I'll put 10 circles on a page, and every time they make an attempt, I'll give a tick. It's really important when you're developing a skill in any child, whether it be speech or a maths-related skill or anything. Human beings hate failing, so they are much better and will engage better if you reward effort over accuracy. It's really important. So if they are giving it a go in the first instance, you're not doing damage by giving them a tick even though it was incorrect, because you're trying to get them to buy into the process, and you're praising them and you're giving them a sense of success and momentum because they're being effortful. And then as slowly, what I've observed over many years of doing this, they become accurate. But I've watched many a session with a parent be derailed because they've said the most dangerous word you say when you're trying to help establish a skill in the first 10 seconds, and that is no. Don't say that word. No means you are wrong, you're not getting it right, and it almost carries connotations of I disapprove of what you've just done, and that's not what you're meaning. But children are used to and have been conditioned with no across their life for good reason and many other times. And no is usually associated with a lot of frustration. So I always go for effort to begin with. So we're trying to develop that sound. Another one is putting the finger on the tip of the tongue. That holds the tongue tip down. So your index finger on the tip of your tongue opening their mouth and then them trying to imitate you making a k. That can sometimes help. And then there's lots of strategies. I'll just pick one other one so we can move on. Getting them to lie on the floor and look at the ceiling. Gravity naturally makes your tongue fall back in your mouth open, trying to imitate that sound again. And sometimes children will hit it off because their tongue naturally rests further back and it's closer to the roof of the mouth. So you'll have some success establishing it. The visualizing side of it, I will often associate a picture of a boy or a girl coughing with it, so pretending that it's the cough sound. And so even though we're making more of a k sound, I'll call it the coughing or the huffing sound or something like that. And then as we treat, so once we've established that sound and we begin to treat it, often we'll pair the sound on the end. So it will go, I will give them a vowel, and it's a vowel that's at the back of their mouth, like or ah. So a back vowel, and then I'll try and get them to transition from that into our sound. It's very hard when kids learn a sound for the first time to then jump straight to words. Most kids can't do it. And you'll get quite frustrated, and they will too. So certainly playing around with really simple contexts is helpful. Do you have any questions
I have
from
so
listeners?
many
Yeah,
questions.
I'm just thinking we should pause for a second.
No, it's been really helpful. Christy said, I'd love to hear what you think about the optimum age to start dealing with a preschooler with a tongue thrust.
Tongue thrust. So what she means by tongue thrust is that the resting posture of the tongue is very forward in the mouth, usually between the teeth at rest. And it's often also characterised by the articulation of sounds like T's and D's, L's, N's, S's, Z's are all made with the tongue between the teeth. And it can even affect your swallowing of liquid as well. Sometimes there can be spillage in really extreme cases. Tongue thrusts are interesting because actually they're connected to your swallow, and so in a sense it's an immature swallow rather than it being just a resting posture or an articulatory error. So we work on how they swallow as well as teaching different sounds and teaching them a better resting posture. In terms of when to work on it, I would often start, because it's quite complex in that there's a lot of talking that happens when I work on tongue thrust, but certainly around about 4 or 5 years old I've started with some, but many of my kids who present with tongue thrust, it's about 6 or 7 that I work on that.
A few queries about lisps.
Lisps. There's actually a podcast we did a while ago on lisps, so I'd recommend people to go back and listen to that. But otherwise, lisps are, there's 3. There's a frontal lisp that's between your teeth, there, so you can see on an S, and it looks like the tongue's poking out. That one is likely to resolve between the ages of 5 and about 7. So I often wouldn't start treating that until a child is a little bit older, because many times, my own son had one and I just left it because I say this and I thought I should probably find out if it's true. It is true.
So he was your guinea pig?
Yeah, I just left him with it. He also had a stutter as well, and I just left that too to see if it would resolve, because he had every indication that it would. But yes, absolutely, lisps, you can, the frontal lisp. The lateral lisp is where the air leaks out over the sides of the tongue, so you get a that one doesn't resolve and it needs treatment. And that's better to treat when they're about, in my opinion, in my clinical experience, about 6 or 7. I have tried with younger kids, and there is certainly evidence you can do it with younger kids, but I think personality heavily influences that. Some children are happy at the age of 4.5 to sit there and do what you're asking, and many really struggle. So I just find older kids who have developed their literacy to a point that I can also use their reading to support the change is very effective. And the last kind of lisp is palatal, and that's way further back, right at the back. That's very mutant, and it's very uncommon. The first 2 are the more common, being the frontal lisp being the most common.
Question from Kat saying, can you help us please on the letter L? My 4.5-year-old niece can't hear the difference between L and Y. Yep,
absolutely. So what's happening there is given we don't have a lot of time today, I might actually come back to this subject again another time, but let's talk about a skip to L. So L, what's happening there is the tongue is having trouble separating or individuating its movement from the jaw. So the jaw is doing the movement of the tongue. So imagine the tongue resting inside the jaw. When you get the child to say light, they'll say yite, because what they're doing is they are moving their jaw to give the tongue the movement, and it doesn't work properly. So the jaw will pull away from the top of your top jaw, your bottom jaw pulls away, the tongue goes with it, creates the y sound. So the first thing to do would be to just teach her First of all, discriminate. Can she hear the difference between, you'd probably want to find two rhyming pairs, and you'll get some weird ones, but I'm just trying to think of one. Anyway, lamb and yam. See, that's not particularly useful, but you've got a rhyming pair there. Does she know, can she hear that there's a difference? And she might be able to distinguish it because she knows what a lamb is, so by exclusion that might be a yam. But given her age, she might not. But anyway, the point is, can she hear the difference? You could just do the absurd and say, did I say this right? I'm going to climb the yadder and see if she can hear it that way. And then you'd have to teach her eye to isolate it. So that's about her tongue needs to come up and touch the gum ridge just behind her top teeth. So sometimes sensitizing that with a bit of ice or touching a straw to it so that she can go up and meet where the straw is touching to place her tongue there. Just commanding her to place her tongue up, saying tongue up behind your teeth. Usually you'll get tongue out and worming down. So you're going to need to be quite hands-on to help her move it up. It's not too early to do this, by the way. 4.5 is a good. I do lots of 4.5-year-olds with Al, so that would be a good time to intervene. And then you would probably, so once your energy would want to go into isolating that movement before you do anything else, because it's very frustrating for kids, and there's no point in pairing it with vowels and progressing it to single words if she's not even able to isolate the movement in the first instance.
Thank you so much, Christian. More questions coming in. I think there's something that's worth revisiting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speech and language therapist Christian Wright.